Every gardening channel in America spent April and May telling you what to plant. They went completely silent the moment July arrived. Silent, because most of them think the season is over. They think July is for watering what you already planted. They are wrong. Picture this. It's the last week of July. Your neighbor's garden, the one that looked finished back in June, is suddenly exploding with new growth. Beans climbing a trellis that wasn't even there 3 weeks ago. A second wave of lettuce sitting fat and crisp in the morning shade. You walk past with your coffee, look at your own beds, half empty, already winding down, and you feel that specific, quiet kind of regret. That is the gap this video closes. There are 10 crops that thrive specifically when planted in July, not despite the heat, but because of it. Seed companies will not tell you this because the planting charts on seed packets are printed once a year for a national audience and they default to spring. Garden centers will not tell you this because by July their seed racks are picked over and they would rather sell you a $6 tomato start than admit you can grow $40 worth of food from a $2 packet planted right now. Let's get into exactly what to plant. Why July is the secret window, and the one mistake that ruins each of these crops for almost everyone who tries them. 1. Bush beans, the 60-day miracle. Bush beans are the crop most gardeners only plant once in May and then completely forget exists for the rest of the year. That is the single most expensive mistake in the vegetable garden. Bush beans mature in 55 to 60 days. Plant them in the first week of July, and you are harvesting fresh beans by early September, right when your spring planting has long since stopped producing and gone woody on the vine. Here's the part almost nobody explains. Beans planted in July germinate faster than beans planted in cool spring soil. Bean seeds need soil temperatures above 65 degrees to germinate reliably, and in May, in much of the country, that soil is still cold and slow. In July, the ground is warm all the way down, and germination that takes 2 weeks in spring happens in 5 to 7 days in summer. You are not just getting a second harvest. You are getting a faster, more vigorous plant than the one you started the season with. The mistake that kills most July bean plantings is watering from above during the hottest part of the day. Wet leaves under a noon sun develop fungal spotting almost overnight, and a stressed bean plant in 90-degree heat will drop its flowers before they ever set a pod. Water at the base, early morning only, and mulch heavily to keep the root zone from overheating. Do that, and one row of bush beans planted this week will hand you 15 to 20 pounds of fresh beans for less than $3 in seed. 2. Cucumbers, the forgotten second wave. Most home gardeners plant cucumbers once in spring, watch the vines succumb to powdery mildew or cucumber beetles by mid-July, and assume the cucumber season is simply over for the year. It isn't. It's just beginning again for anyone willing to replant. A fresh cucumber seed sown in early July skips the disease pressure that builds up over a full spring and summer on an old vine. You are planting into a clean slate at the exact moment soil temperatures are perfect for explosive vine growth. Cucumbers planted now will be setting fruit by late August, right as grocery store cucumber prices climb because commercial supply dips in late summer heat. The mistake here is reusing the same patch of soil the spring cucumbers grew in. Cucumber pathogens linger in soil for a full season, and replanting directly into that same spot all but guarantees the new vine inherits the old vine's disease. Move the row, even by just a few feet, and you give the new planting a genuinely clean start. Do that, and a $6 packet of seed becomes a wall of cucumbers by Labor Day. 3. Summer squash, the plant everyone gives up on too early. Squash vine borers and squash bugs devastate spring-planted zucchini and summer squash by midsummer almost every single year. Most gardeners watch their plant collapse, pull it out, and write off squash entirely until next spring. That single decision is responsible for more lost harvests than almost any other mistake in the summer garden. Here is what the borer's biology actually tells us. The first generation of squash vine borer and moths lays eggs in June. A squash plant started in July, germinates and grows past its most vulnerable seedling stage after that first wave of egg laying has already passed. You are not fighting the pest. You are simply arriving after the battle has already moved on. A second planting in July routinely outproduces the spring planting that everyone else gave up on weeks earlier. The mistake is planting in the exact same spot as the failed spring squash, where borer larvae and squash bug eggs are already overwintering in the soil and plant debris. Clear all old squash material completely, plant in fresh ground, and a single July planted zucchini hill can produce 6 to 10 pounds of squash a week by September. 4. Carrots, the sweetest harvest you'll ever pull. Carrots planted in July do something spring carrots never do. They mature heading directly into the cool nights of fall, and that temperature drop triggers the plant to convert stored starches into sugar as a natural antifreeze response. The result is a carrot that is measurably, noticeably sweeter than anything you pulled in June. University extension trials have confirmed what old-time gardeners always knew by taste alone. Carrots that mature in cool fall conditions test higher in sugar content than carrots grown and harvested entirely in summer heat. You are not just getting a harvest. You are getting the best tasting carrot your garden will produce all year. And almost nobody is planting for it on purpose. The mistake that ruins more July carrot plantings than anything else is letting the soil surface dry out during germination. Carrot seed is tiny, sits barely below the surface, and a single day of dried out soil in July heat can kill the entire germinating crop before it ever breaks the surface. Cover the row with a thin layer of straw and water lightly every single day until you see green, and that sweet fall harvest is virtually guaranteed. 5. Kale, the crop that gets better as it gets colder. Kale planted in midsummer for a fall harvest is one of the best kept secrets in vegetable gardening, and the reason is almost the opposite of how most people think about growing food. So, kale doesn't just tolerate cold, it actively improves because of it. Like carrots, the plant produces sugars as a defense against frost, and kale that has been through 1 or 2 light frosts develops a sweetness and tenderness that summer kale simply cannot match. Plant kale seed in mid to late July, and it will be reaching full size right as the first frosts of October and November arrive, at which point you can keep harvesting leaves well past the point most of your garden has gone completely dormant. Many gardeners in moderate climates are still picking kale from a July planting in December. The mistake is starting kale too early in the heat, where it bolts, turns bitter, and bug pressure from cabbage worms is at its absolute peak. Wait until the back half of July, when the worst of the heat begins to ease, and that single planting becomes one of the longest producing crops in your entire garden. 6. Beets, the 2-for-1 crop nobody talks about. Beets planted in July give you something almost no other crop on this list does: 2 separate harvests from 1 seed. The greens are ready to harvest as baby greens within 30 days, tender enough for salads, while the root itself keeps developing underground for another month or more into a sweet, fall-ready beet. Like carrots and kale, beets sweeten dramatically as the weather cools, and a beet pulled in late October after a few cold nights will taste fundamentally different from one pulled in July heat. You're planting once and harvesting twice across 2 different months from a packet of seed that costs less than a candy bar. The mistake almost everyone makes with beets is failing to thin the seedlings. Beet seeds are actually seed clusters, And if you don't thin the resulting cluster of seedlings down to one plant every 3 to 4 inches, you get a tangle of stunted, woody little roots instead of the smooth, full beets you were expecting. Thin them ruthlessly 2 weeks after germination, and that one row becomes both a salad bowl and a root cellar staple by fall. 7. Lettuce, the crop everyone thinks they already failed at. Most home gardeners try lettuce exactly once, in spring, watch it bolt and turn bitter the moment real heat arrives in June, and conclude that lettuce simply isn't worth growing. That conclusion is based on a single, badly timed attempt. Lettuce sown in late July, timed to mature as the weather cools into September, behaves like an entirely different plant. No bolting, no bitterness, just slow, steady, sweet growth. The trick is variety selection combined with timing. Heat-tolerant varieties sown in the last week of July, in a spot with afternoon shade, germinate just fine in warm soil and then spend their growing season heading into cooler and cooler conditions rather than hotter ones. That is the exact opposite of the spring experience that convinced so many people lettuce wasn't for them. The mistake is sowing lettuce seed too deep. Lettuce seed needs light to germinate and should barely be pressed into the soil surface, not buried. Bury it the way you would a bean seed, and most of it will simply never come up. Surface sow it correctly in late July, and you'll be harvesting crisp, sweet lettuce well into the part of fall when most gardeners assume the season is already over. 8. Radishes, the fastest win in the entire garden. If you want proof that July planting works before any other crop on this list has even matured, plant radishes. Many varieties are ready to harvest in 25 to 30 days, which means a radish sown in the first week of July is sitting on your dinner plate before the end of the month. There is no faster return on a seed packet anywhere in the vegetable garden. Radishes planted in summer for a fall harvest also tend to be milder and crisper than spring radishes, which often turn sharp and pithy once any heat hits them. A radish maturing into cooler September air stays crisp, mild, and juicy in a way spring radishes almost never manage. The mistake is overcrowding the row. Radish seed is cheap and people tend to sow it heavily, but radishes need real space to bulb out properly, roughly an inch between plants after thinning. Crowded radishes put all their energy into leaves instead of roots, and you end up with a row of greens and almost nothing underground. Thin early, thin properly, and you'll have a harvest before most of the other crops on this list have even finished germinating. 9. Winter squash, the long game that pays off big. This is the one crop on this list that asks for patience, and it rewards that patience more than almost anything else you can grow. Winter squash varieties, like butternut and acorn, need roughly 90 to 100 days to mature, which means a July planting times out perfectly to a harvest in October, right before the first hard frost. With a squash that will then store in your pantry for months. Here's the financial reality most people never calculate. A single butternut squash plant, properly spaced and fed, can produce 8 to 10 fruits over a season. At grocery store prices for organic winter squash running $2 to $3 per pound, one well-tended vine from a seed packet costing under $4 can produce $60 to $80 worth of food that stores all winter without a single trip to a freezer or a canner. The mistake is planting winter squash too late, past the middle of July, and running out of growing season before the fruit can fully mature and develop the thick rind needed for long storage. Get it in the ground by the second week of July at the absolute latest, and you are setting yourself up for a pantry full of squash that will carry you well into the new year. 10. Corn, the crop nobody believes you can still plant. Tell most gardeners you're planting corn in July, and they will tell you it's too late. They are working off the spring planting chart and nothing else. Fast maturing corn varieties, the ones bred specifically for short seasons, can go from seed to harvest in 60 to 70 days, which puts a July 1st planting on your table by early September, well before the first frost in the vast majority of growing regions. A second corn planting in July also sidesteps the heaviest pressure from corn earworm moths, whose populations peak earlier in the season. Plant later, and you are simply missing the worst of that particular fight entirely. The mistake that ruins almost every attempt at a second corn crop is planting in a single thin row. Corn is wind pollinated, and a lone row or a tiny block will pollinate poorly, leaving you with cobs full of gaps and missing kernels. Plant in blocks, at minimum 4 rows by 4 rows, even if that means a small block tucked into a corner of the garden, and that July planting will give you a genuine, fully kerneled harvest, while your neighbors are still telling each other it can't be done. The pattern beneath all 10. Back for a moment and look at what these 10 crops actually have in common. Every single one of them solves a problem created by spring planting. Bush beans dodge the slow, cold soil germination of May. Cucumbers and squash dodge peak pest pressure. Carrots, kale, and beets use the cooling fall air to actually improve their flavor instead of fighting against it. Lettuce escapes the bitterness of summer, bolting by maturing into autumn instead of into July heat. Radishes deliver speed when you need a win. Winter squash uses the full length of the season to build something that will feed you for months. And corn slips through a pest window that spring corn never gets to avoid. July isn't a dead zone in the gardening calendar. It is a second spring, hiding in plain sight, and the only reason it stays hidden is that almost nobody prints a planting chart for it. If you're the kind of gardener who has felt that specific frustration, walking past an empty bed in late summer, wondering what else you could have grown, this is exactly the channel for you. Every single week, this channel digs into the planting windows nobody else is talking about. The timing tricks that turn an ordinary backyard into a garden that produces almost year-round. Subscribe now, because next week's video covers exactly what to start in August for a harvest that carries you straight through Thanksgiving, and you do not want to miss that one. Tell me in the comments which of these 10 you're putting in the ground this week, and tell me what state or zone you're gardening in. I read every single comment, and your answers shape exactly what gets covered next on this channel. There is something quietly satisfying about being the one person on your street who understood that the season wasn't over in June, while everyone else is letting their beds sit half empty, waiting for next spring. You're about to be pulling sweet carrots, snapping fresh beans, and stacking a pantry full of winter squash, all from seed you planted this week, for less than the cost of a single restaurant meal. That is not a small thing. That is food security you built with your own hands, on your own schedule, without waiting for anyone's permission or anyone's planting chart. Go get your seed packets. The window is open right now, and it will not stay open much longer. Plant something today.